Welcome to another Pharma Forum podcast. In this episode, I speak with Dr. Catherine Beech, CEO of Exonate, a company seeking to bring a new treatment to patients with diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema, which would set aside any fears of an injection into their eyes in order to save their sight. Discussing the landscape of diabetic vision loss and just how widespread an issue this is, Catherine also shares details of Exonate's early days development of its eye drop alternative. The hope being that early diagnosis will enable prescription of self-administered eye drops, thereby arresting development of vision loss in time and saving sight. Catherine hopes the forward-looking trajectory of this will take less than a decade, although, she notes, the reality is that drug development is not quick. An insightful and hopeful discussion on diabetic vision loss. Do let us know if you've any comments on the conversation. And as ever, thank you for listening. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Dr. Catherine Beech, CEO of Exonate, a company developing novel, non-invasive, small molecule pharmaceuticals that leverage and exploit alternative splicing patterns to treat vision loss associated with diabetes, one of the more prevalent and growing healthcare burdens in Western countries. Welcome, Catherine.
Hello, thank you very much for having me on. It's absolutely lovely to meet you.
And you. Today's topic of conversation, listeners, will circle around the growing issue of retinal vascular disease and its result from the increasing prevalence of diabetes. About 537 million adults globally live with diabetes, with 90% to 95% of those cases being type 2 diabetes. And sufferers are at an increased risk of several eye health conditions, including diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema. Current treatments for diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema are invasive and include medication injections into the eye as well as laser therapy. Soon, however, a less invasive treatment for diabetic retinopathy and diabetic macular edema may be available in the form of a simple eye drop. But first of all, Catherine, perhaps you could introduce yourself a little bit for listeners. Tell us a bit more about your journey, the path taken to today, and doing what you do with Exonate. I believe you're a bit of a serial entrepreneur.
That's interesting. It wouldn't be how I would necessarily describe myself, but I can see why you would think that. I did medicine as a degree, became a GP, and then went into the pharmaceutical industry, developing drugs for diseases like HIV and Parkinson's. I then moved out of there into much more early stage companies because I felt that it was possible to make a real difference. So Exonate is a company that was formed by a group of us, 3 academic founders and myself, using intellectual property from 3 universities, Nottingham, Bristol, and the University of New South Wales. And we pulled together biology and chemistry in order to try to make a drug. Specifically, we chose ophthalmology because one of our founders, Dr. Steve Harper, his father has eye disease and is having injections into the back of his eye once a month and really hated it. So we thought that our biology and chemistry could actually address diseases of the retina, and that if we could move away from injections, then that would make a real difference to acceptability to patients, providing that we were able to maintain the efficacy. So in 2014, we started the company called Exonate, and Exonate has focused almost entirely on ophthalmology. We were initially looking at diseases like macular edema, but then found from results that actually we could go earlier and we could treat diseases such as diabetic retinopathy. So that's where we are. We hope that we will be successful, but we are still in the development stage.
Thank you, Catherine. So it sounds like it's been rather a personal journey, at least for one of your founders.
I think so.
To start our discussion today then, can you perhaps lay out the landscape of retinal vascular disease as it stands in 2024, including also the role that diabetes plays in its increase?
I think that there are obviously retinal diseases of genetic cause, but the really two big ones are age-related macular edema, which when it's in its wet form causes blindness in patients, and then the macular edema that is related to diabetes. The one that we are addressing at the moment is diabetic retinal disease. This is something that's caused in diabetic patients, and it's due to the length of time they've had diabetes, poor control of their diabetes, so high blood sugar levels, and problems with hypertension. And lifestyle changes can make modifications, but in general, that's quite difficult to do. As you said at the beginning, there are over 500 million adults worldwide who have diabetes, and all of those are at risk of diabetic eye disease. Probably about half of them will get some sort of eye disease resulting in vision loss. So this is an enormous problem if you're a diabetic. There are treatments. Early disease can be treated by laser, but the late stages of disease are in the main treated by monthly injections directly into the eye, which are difficult as a patient to accept. I don't think they're necessarily awful because they do give you a local anesthetic. But from a psychological point of view, this is something that patients find difficult to accept. In patients with diabetic eye disease, probably about 40% of those who are offered the injection, it doesn't work. And in those patients who are actually given an appointment, a time to come and have the injection, about a third of them don't attend because they just can't get their heads around it. So it's a massive problem. And we are hoping that by creating an eye drop that we can relieve some of the problems in the market.
Gosh, I was going to ask about the shortfalls of what sounds, in plain speaking, a horrific treatment, perhaps, to have an injection to address this. So what you say with the third not showing up for the appointment, I think perhaps listeners can understand as much as I can understand.
To be fair, I honestly don't think it's as awful as from a sort of psychological point of view we think. It's, one of those sayings, I would rather stick a sharp stick in my eye. And so we have a horror of it. But when you speak to individuals who are accepting it, they say it's obviously not nice, but you get a local anesthetic into your eye and you really don't feel it. And because it's working so close to your eye, you really don't see it. So I think it's just the thought of having an injection directly into your eye that spooks people rather than the actual reality of it.
Oh, that's interesting to hear the feedback from patients who have had it. So
yes,
for those who have their appointment booked, please go along. It's not as bad as it sounds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are actually, if you take the whole diabetic population, probably only about 3% of people are actually having injections. Mm-hmm. And then there are 30% of people who have the beginnings of the eye disease, but as yet have not begun to lose vision and therefore are not yet offered this treatment. So it's a massive amount of people who are literally being watched and waiting until their eye disease becomes severe enough that somebody will give them the injection.
Okay, and then something like Exonate comes along with an alternative. So if we, a potential alternative, yes.
Yeah.
So if we focus on Exonate, what can you tell us? Go for it, Catherine.
Okay. Well, we think that the holy grail of treatment would be that you as a diabetic go to your ophthalmologist or your optometrist, so you maybe turf up at Boots or Specsavers, and you are told that you have the beginnings of diabetic eye disease, so that your ophthalmologist, your eye doctor, would then prescribe an eye drop that would stop the eye disease. So let me tell you a bit about the progression. So you are a diabetic, you begin to get slight changes at the back of your eye, which are seen by the optometrist when they look into your eye. And these are little bleeds, little aneurysms, a discolorization of the back of your eye. And that progresses slowly or quickly in some people to leaky blood vessels that cause you to have swelling or edema at the back of the eye. And it's this edema that is covering over the macula that starts you to get vision loss. So you lose central vision. Firstly, it becomes a bit unclear, a bit like somebody's put a coat of Vaseline over your eye. And at the edges, you can still see. So you still have your peripheral vision, but you lose things like the ability to read, the ability to look at somebody's face and monitor what their emotions are. So it's these important tasks that you lose. You might be monitored for several years whilst this vision begins to change, and then you would be given an injection into your eye, and that would regress the eye disease. It is a bit of a relentless journey, and what we are hoping that early on in the disease, the eye drops will hold it. Or even turn it back. So we have in diabetic patients, we did a clinical trial where we looked at the leakage at the back of the eye and found that actually these eye drops decrease it. Now, it is very, very early in development, but we were given a huge boost that we might be on the right track. So that's where we're trying to go with this. So it's not available to patients yet. It is not going to be available for several years. But I think that there are ourselves working in eye drops and another couple of little companies also trying to make eye drops. And then there are some other companies who are trying to make a tablet that you take all to try to hold the early stage disease.
Thank you. Did you want to speak any more about the trial results itself for your lead candidate?
We did this trial in Australia. We recruited diabetic patients. Very kindly, they agreed to take part of the trial. We had almost no side effects from the eye drops. They didn't sting. Patients found them quite comfortable. So we are progressing with the development, and we hope to be able to start a larger, longer-lasting phase 2 trial later this year, early next year, which then would give us the definitive answer of have we managed to crack this problem or not. But I must stress it's early days.
It's early days, but it's with an important early intervention treatment that
Yes.
you're coming to the fore. So before I sort of go to my final question on forward gazing, perhaps you could broaden out for us the real improvement really that this can offer for patient welfare in alleviating the need for repeated invasive injections. I know we've covered it, but really let's bring it home and make it quite clear just what these nearly no side effect eye drops can offer.
If they work, if the early promise holds, we hope that patients would be able to be diagnosed at an early stage of their disease. They would then be offered eye drops, which they would self-administer, and that this would hold the progression of their diabetic disease and either save their vision completely or delay the loss of the vision.
Gosh, yes, I think that did go into our forward gazing there, Catherine, and the sort of trajectory where this is going for future treatments for retinal vascular disease. So what sort of time frame would you ideally envisage that happening in? Is it a decade we're talking about?
No, I hope it'll be shorter than that. Because this would be a chronic treatment, it's incredibly important that we get the safety profile right. And the only way to do that is to do a clinical trial over a longer period of time, so that if there were any late side effects that you would find them. So I think we would be having to do a large study of diabetic patients. We would have to treat all of those patients for at least a year. And then the regulatory authorities will review the data and make the final decision of whether this is a safe, well-tolerated and efficacious drug. I also think that for ethical reasons, we would have to show that we were as good as current treatment for patients. It would be wrong to offer people a less good treatment, even if it was easier to take. I think it's important that people understand that the current treatments work very well. They have their drawback in their administration, but they work well and they do save sight. So it's important that it's not just, I could have an eye drop, but if it didn't work, you mustn't take it. So it's important to get this right. I think probably we're looking at maybe 6 years because it's going to be a chronic treatment. So it's not, drug development is not quick.
Thank you very much for your time today, Catherine. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And so that concludes another episode of the Pharma Forum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous instalments at pharmaforum.com/podcasts. The Pharma Forum podcast is also available on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean, and pretty much wherever you get your other podcasts. Just search for Pharma Forum and press subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us as well on X or Twitter and LinkedIn at Pharma Forum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.